Welcome to Dark Horse Auto and Diesel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to remove the engine and transmission from an 07 to 10 Ford Edge with the 3.5. 11 to 14s as well as other engine options will be similar, but there's a few slight differences that I won't be covering. The shop manuals all say that the engine and trans have to be removed from the bottom, which requires a lift and some other things that not everyone has access to. I'm going to show you that it is possible to remove them from the top in your own garage with tools that most DIY mechanics already have. Whatever you don't have, you can buy with the money you save by not having to take it to a shop. Most of this is done on a 2010 two-wheel drive. I'm removing the engine from that and putting it into an 08 all-wheel drive, which means that the extra steps required for an all-wheel drive will be cut in when it's relevant. There may be a few minor differences between your vehicle and what you'll see in this video because some idiot before me attempted a transmission swap. I have a video covering that and why you need to be careful who you have work on your vehicle linked in the description if you really want to see all that. This vehicle was brought to me to get fixed properly, but with everything he screwed up, it was actually faster and cheaper to pull the engine and put it into a different vehicle, which that one had a blown motor due to a failed water pump. I also have a video on how to replace that and the timing chains, which I'll also link to in the description and at the end of this video. So one of the first things that we're going to do is go ahead and take the hood off. And the reason for that is because this entire front clip has to come off of here. And since it uses a prop rod, that is obviously going to cause some issues. Now, you could block it up with some chunks of wood or something, but knowing my luck, I'll knock one out and the hood's going to come down on my head. Hood's pretty simple to take off. There's 4 10mm bolts, 2 here and then 2 on the hinge on the other side. And we need to unhook this as well, the washer fluid line. Don't do what I did. Don't worry about taking any of this stuff off. Unhook it here. There's a little bit of a flexible line that's kind of difficult to get pulled off of there. And then there's these little push pin holders here. Go ahead and pop those out and then just end up taking the hose with the hood. And we'll go ahead and just loosen these up a little bit. Now I would recommend having a helper for this part. Go ahead and support the hood and take those bolts out. Alright. Oh, up and over. Back a little further on the antenna. There we go. So the next thing we're going to do is take the front bumper cover off, and stuff's falling. It's pretty simple. So I'm just going to say right here, yours may differ from this one a little bit because of the history of this vehicle. To get the front bumper off, the first thing we need to do is go ahead and take this here out from underneath, which obviously this one's already off, but it's pretty straightforward on how to take it off. Obviously you're going to be under the vehicle, but there's several of these little push pins, and what you do is just get a screwdriver up underneath this outer part here, and it pops up, and then you can pull it out. And then there's a couple screws going along here, and those are going to be 5.5mm. So mostly what it's going to be is you've got 4 of these going across the top, and they're just Phillips. You unscrew them, they pop out, and then these here, those are 10mm, and there's two of those bolts, and then 4 of these, and then come down here to the fender well, and there's supposed to be a bolt there. But there's a couple bolts, little screws, they're 5.5mm that go around here, and there's one on the bottom too. And we'll take all those out, and then we should be able to just slide the front bumper completely off of here. Great, 10mm missing. Of course it is. Take these out, and a lot of times they don't cooperate. Oh, that one did. That's how they're supposed to work. And then you can just pull the whole thing out. Alright, good times. So if they don't work, you pretty much just have to get in here with a screwdriver and pop it up. Because if you don't take the centerpiece out, this will just be expanded out and you'll end up breaking the whole clip. Well, hi, Shelby. And once you got those out, make sure you put them in a place where you're going to lose them. And I was correct, those are 10 millimeter. And obviously you don't have to have the front wheels off yet, but it makes it a lot easier if I have to explain to you how to do that. This is way too complicated for you. One thing I would like to add though is I'd recommend getting you some of these. These little pads for your jack stands are really nice to keep from destroying your pinch welds. I think I paid like $5 for them on Amazon, something like that. And then on the other side, conveniently, I have one missing, two missing already, actually. And that one's already missing. So next, along in here on both sides, it's just clipped in, and so you just want to get your hand in there and it just pops out. Be careful to try to not break the clips on it, but you really don't have to pull very hard, and just be careful with it. There we go. Next, if you've got fog lights, you want to come in and unhook those and just come through the side here and reach in here and unclip it. Show you what we got going on here. You just need to unclip that from the light itself. Try not to break the clips. One down, and then the other side. So now we should be able to just grab a hold of the bumper, and the whole thing just comes right off. And it weighs probably 15-20 pounds. It's not heavy at all. Alright, next we'll go ahead and remove the headlights since we're right here. And there's a couple different style of clips you'll have to deal with. This one here is, it's got two tabs here. You'll spread those apart and push down on it. This one here just has this tab here. I'll just go ahead and do it. Two tabs on this one. And then this one here, on the passenger side, it's on the top. You'll push down on it, but you push up here on the bottom, and then it just comes right out. Then we'll go ahead and get our 10 millimeter again, and we got a bolt here. Now, the whole thing just comes right out. Do it again over here. Alright, next we're going to take the fender liner out here, and depending on how dumb the person was that worked on it before you, there may be a whole bunch of these little plastic clips, or there may be like 3. Let's go ahead and take all of those out. And then we'll come back here and take out these, once again, 5.5 millimeter. And there's supposed to be one there, but it wasn't there. And we could have taken these out first, but with the bumper out of the way, it just gives us that much more room to work with. Makes it quite a bit easier. So we should be loose now, I think. Yep, just kind of work that out. Obviously do the same on the other side, because we're going to need access to transmission cooler lines over there. And I always recommend this in all my videos, but just put the screws back where you took them out of. Just kind of loosely thread them in. That way you don't lose them. Another tool you can use is one of these. If you do a whole lot of work on vehicles, I'd highly recommend you get one. I think I've recommended that in pretty much every video I've made, but it can make life a whole lot easier. Oh yeah, no stabby of the fingy. Yep. And if you do happen to break a couple of these, it's probably not a big deal because obviously the other one was held in with only 3. And the reason we're taking this one off is obviously for better access to some stuff like, well, not so much the axle shaft, but definitely these here at your transmission lines, which I'm gonna have to get a special tool for that, but we'll worry about that when the time comes. All right, next what we're gonna do is take this lower bumper thing piece off. There's 3 10mm nuts, another one right there. There's 3 on each side, and then there's 2 here that holds this power steering line on. This is essentially the power steering cooler. And we can just swing that out of the way for the time being. So while we're down here, we'll go ahead and take these 2 10mm out. Alright, then these here, there's two, and then one underneath here and one on the other side. These are 13mm. Got some slightly heavier artillery here. Oh, there's 2 more right here, 10mm. All right, now we should be able to, yep. You probably noticed this whole thing moving here, and basically what this is pretty much just a big sandwich of all of your AC condenser, radiator, transcooler, all that stuff. It's basically just a big sandwich of coolers, and that all lifts out in one assembly, which is really convenient. So one of the next steps we're going to do here is start draining fluids and taking care of all that so we can get this whole thing out of here. Alright, so now we're going to drain the coolant out. So we're on the driver's side here, and right here is where it's going to drain out of. There's a little plug. Get my camera up in there, maybe. Yep, right there, that white thing. That's going to take a 3/4 or 19mm socket, wrench, whatever. Just break that loose, and like I said, it's going to drain out from right here. And then once you got that opened up, come up here and open this up, because otherwise it's going to create a vacuum in the cooling system. Be prepared for a little bit of a mess, but as long as you got a big enough bucket, you'll be alright. Maybe. I've got coolant running everywhere right now, so don't unscrew that thing all the way. I'm going to fix that. So if you don't want to make a mess everywhere, this is about the rate it's going to drain out. Don't you know, if you don't care about making a mess, just go ahead and pull that plug all the way out. But otherwise, it's a little bit slower, but it's much more controlled if you just unscrew it most of the way, and it just runs out the hole at the bottom instead of everywhere. And then while that's draining, we can go ahead and start getting stuff loose from this whole assembly here, like the hood latch. I'm going to take that off right now. These are 8mm. If you're smart, you'll probably put a couple marks on it, but I'm not, so it'll be all right. And then once we've got this off, we can go ahead and we can't feed this through here, so we got to take the cable off. So in order to get the cable off of this, we're going to go ahead, get some needle nose or something, squeeze these little tabs together, and that allows that to come through there. Just like that. Then we can fish this back through here. So the proper way to do that would be to go underneath and squeeze it, but we fixed it. And then just let that dangle out of the way somewhere. Then we can unhook these sensors, and this one, you just got a little tab you push down on, pull it back, and then pop this off of here. And there. And then we'll do the same on this side. This one just push in. Actually, yeah, we'll just take the whole sensor off. It's easy enough. It's not screwed on. Maybe. Alright, that's free. Alright, next you're going to want to remove the air conditioning lines from here. And I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning, but you want to have the system responsibly evacuated. It's very illegal and I guess bad for the environment to just dump the stuff into the atmosphere. So I'm not going to recommend you do that. So before you even start, you should probably take this to a dealership or some shop and have them draw the system down, pull the refrigerant out. Alright, so before we go any further with this part here, it's going to make things a heck of a lot easier if we go ahead and remove our washer fluid reservoir and our coolant reservoir, because one of the disconnects for the air conditioning is right down in here. We're going to pop this line off and just run it down into the jug. There. Now you can sit and drink a beer or something while that's draining. Alright, next we'll pull the wiring off of the reservoir here. There's this plug here. And that one. Pretty self-explanatory. And we're just going to go ahead and remove this so it's out of our way. And then there is a 10mm there, and then an 8mm up top. That one wasn't even tight. Oh, and don't forget to unhook this hose too. And then we can tip it up and drain the rest of it into our fancy container here. Next we're going to take the coolant reservoir off, and you know, there's two hoses. There's one here and one here. Just a pair of pliers or channel locks or something be enough to get those off. I I hate these clamps. I think there's actually like a special tool that you can use on these, but I'm too cheap to buy one because channel locks seem to work just fine. Let me get that slid down. These are supposed to lock too, but I never have any luck with that. Alright. And then 8mm and 8mm. And out it comes, dripping, in this case, water out because there was no coolant there. And then now that that's out of the way, there's a connection here, and then we're going to take this off here, this one here too. That's a 13 mil. We can go ahead and pop that loose, which we'll just go ahead and do that now since we're standing here. And be careful when you pop this loose. It's kind of snug, you don't want to twist your lines around. So hold it, and there we go. And there we go. Put our nut back on, and then I'm going to get some plastic baggies to put over this, both ends of it, and tape it up so that keep contaminants out of the system. And since we're up here disconnecting some hoses and stuff, we might as well unhook these two here because I plan on taking those two out with this piece here. I know I'm kind of jumping around a bit. You can thank ADD for that. Oh, that one actually locked. That's like the first time that's ever happened. Let's see if I can get the other one. No way. It's probably gonna snap on my finger. Come on. Okay, well, at least I got one. Get them kind of up and out of the way, or in the case of this one, down and out of the way. That way when we pull this cooler sandwich off, everything should pretty much just come right out. Alright, now we can work on this other AC line here. And this thing here just kind of holds it together. There's you spin it around right, there's a little thing you can push on here. And there's two of them. Push down on both of them. And that pops off. Then we need to get our disconnect tools and pop that out, and I need to get a couple more baggies as well, because you can see I got these nice and protected from the elements. We're going to do the same to that one as well, and then this one when we eventually take it off, which actually let's just go ahead and pop this off now. I can show you a little better what's going on with that other one. This is the same thing, it's just a different size. These two ends here push down on them, and then it just slides right off. And on this one down here, you're going to come from the front, and you're going to need some little fuel line air conditioner disconnect tools. This is the set I have, it's nothing fancy. So you're just going to take this and push it up into the fitting, and kind of might turn it a little bit. Sometimes it takes a little bit of pressure. You'll feel it kind of snap in. There we go. Kind of rotate a little bit, and then once you get that tool slid in there, just wiggle the lines apart. They call them quick connect, not quick disconnect. I believe there's a reason for that. Great in the factory, not so much on the shop floor. There. Wow. So now since we're up here, it'll be your call if you want to go ahead and deal with this or calm down and do it later, but since I'm already here messing with it, I'm just gonna go ahead and do it. Now, if you thought the air conditioning lines were fun, you're in for a real treat now. So we're going to work on these transmission lines on the driver's side of the car, and you are going to need a special tool. Some of these things, they used to have a metal version of them. That's what I was hoping to get, but apparently the old Big O doesn't sell them anymore. That's the part number for it. If you want to get it, well, you're going to have to get something. So anyway, these things here, they just pop off of there, sort of. The way these work is pretty much just like the AC lines. You just get the tool up in there. That's the wrong size. And push it up into the fitting and wiggle down. That actually wasn't too bad. I might want to get something to catch that with first, because we're about to make a mess. Kids' trick-or-treat bucket ought to work nice. Yep, there we go. And then the same on the other side. That one was surprisingly not bad. This one doesn't look nearly as good. But yep, this one's being stubborn. There we go. That right there, we have to take that out. That's an 8mm, and that's holding this AC line right here attached to the frame of the car, and that's going to keep us from pulling this whole assembly out. So we'll go ahead and take that out. An 8mm ratcheting wrench actually seems to fit down in there a little better, a lot quicker. So. Alright. So that's loose. These two bolts are already loose, but they're 10mm. Don't pull them all the way out until you're ready to pull this piece out, because otherwise it'll just slide off, and that's obviously not going to be a good thing. One more thing before we pull this out is, if you still have the radiator drain open, you're going to want to close that. All right, and one last thing before we try to pull this cooler pack out is, don't forget to unhook this. This is a sensor for your air conditioner. Just get your finger and just kind of pull out on it, and then wiggles right off of there. Put some pressure towards the back of the vehicle when you're taking these bolts out here. These are both 10mm, because when you take those out, this whole thing's just going to want to slide right off. So stick your beer gut up against it, take these out, and hopefully, fifth time is a charm here. Oh yeah, there we go. Now we have a huge gaping hole to work on all kinds of other stuff. I would like to mention real quick, before we go any further, that this whole piece here, it's got a little bit of weight to it, just so you're prepared for it. It probably weighs a good, I don't know, 50-60 pounds. So if you need a helper for that, that's fine. Just don't overestimate your abilities and drop the thing on the floor. Yes, I look stupid with this thing on my head. All right, next we're going to take the battery tray out. I don't really know what size they're supposed to be. They're probably either 8 or 10mm. I think you can probably figure it out though. But that's all it takes to take it out. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is work on getting our axle shafts out. You don't necessarily have to do this right now, but I'm doing that so that I can get the wheels back on this. So when I go to pull the engine and everything out, I can actually just kind of lift it up and roll the car out of the garage. There's this big nut right here. It is a 35mm. You can probably find a standard socket that fits it well enough. And then what we're going to do is get a punch and a hammer, and break this thing free from inside of the bearing. And you don't want to hammer directly on this because you're going to screw your threads up, and then you're going to end up getting a new axle shaft because you done ruined it. So that's what this little hole right here is actually for, is to help you center a punch in it. And then this one's probably going to pop out pretty easily, but yeah. Don't necessarily expect yours to be that easy. Should have used a different punch. And then we're going to take our brake caliper off. Now, I'm sure the service manuals and stuff probably tell you to take the entire knuckle off. Well, that's not necessary, and I'm going to show you that. One thing I'm going to do too, just for kind of a safety precaution, is I'm going to take the brake hose loose from this little bracket right here, just to give us a little bit more room to swing this out of the way. You could probably get away without doing it, but it's easy enough to do. It's just a 10 millimeter that holds that on. And of course we're bending the bracket. Alright, you know what? We're going to try it without doing that. We're not going to take the whole bracket for the caliper off. We're just going to take the caliper itself off. There's a bolt here and then one over here, and those are 17 millimeter. Impact. Wow. This is why I buy tools with a lifetime warranty. I think that's loose. Sometimes they get a little stuck in there. Which tells me that whoever did this last brake job didn't put quite enough lubricant in there. Yeah, that's pretty dry. We'll make sure it's loose before we pull that top one all the way out. Yep. You may need to get in there with a screwdriver or a small pry bar, but just be careful what you're prying on. And now, I can't stress this enough, do not let the caliper hang from the brake hose. So I just usually get a little tarp strap or something. You can use wire, whatever you want, just something to suspend it by, to where you're not putting that stress on the brake hose itself. Just like that. You can leave your brake pads and everything in place there. We don't need to take those out. You can take them out if you want, just to keep them from falling on the floor. But so then we're going to take these two nuts off right here, and those are 24 millimeter. And then we'll pull these bolts out. Might have to tap on it a little bit. Just be careful you don't mushroom the end out too bad. These are pretty free though. Sometimes you might have to take a punch and just kind of tap it out the rest of the way. Make sure you watch your fingers because it might move a little bit. Now what we're going to do is just lean this forward. You know what? Well, no hardware. That's cool. Somebody did a pretty new brake job and didn't put the hardware in. Good job. So you can just wiggle that and it comes loose. And if you're careful with it and get at the right angles, this should pop out of here. What we're going to try to do is just get this positioned, yeah, that's better, to where we can compress the CV axle a little bit, and there we're out. So there's no need to pull the lower ball joint, tie rod, anything like that. And then we'll have to get up in here and pop that out. Before we pull our axle shafts, we want to drain the transmission out, and that's going to be this little guy right here. It's on the front of the trans, right next to this little guy here, and that is 11 millimeter. And keep note of where this bolt is positioned, because when we put it back in, we're not going to run it all the way up. It's going to stick down a little bit. I think the proper torque spec for it when we put it back on is like 8 foot-pounds or something like that. Not very much. You may want to put this into a container that you can measure it with when you're done, or just, you know, dump this back out and measure how much you took out so that you can put the proper amount back in. Now, I really hope this shows up on the camera, because I'm wearing a camera on my head and it points in the general direction that I'm looking, but I don't know for sure if it's going to show up. But even if it doesn't show up, you'll at least see get a pretty good idea what I'm doing here. Alright, I have to be really careful what I'm doing, because otherwise the camera falls off my head. So what we're going to want to do is get up in here and pry this out. It's usually not very difficult, doesn't require a lot of force, but for safety purposes, I'm going to try to not pry directly on the transmission housing. Okay, I stopped caring and just decided to be gentle with it, and it is moving now. There we go. I said they're not in there it's not very firmly locked in there, it's just kind of enough to hold it. But you don't want to crack your transmission housing getting this apart. Oh, that's out far enough. Basically, all you need to do is just make sure that that moved a little bit to get past the little clip that holds it in. And then from there, you can just gently wiggle it out of there. It really doesn't take much once you get past that clip. Right now, you'll understand why we drained some of the transmission fluid out, because otherwise you're probably going to have a whole bunch running out about right now. And this little clip right here, I don't want to touch it too much because my hands are dirty, but that little clip is really all that holds it in there. And that's all we're doing. We're prying on it down there, just getting it to where this clip pops out, and then we can pull it out by hand. Now, if you've got an all-wheel drive model, there is 4 bolts down here on the rear drive shaft that you'll need to take off, and those are all 13 millimeter. And then this will just pop off of here. This will compress back in enough to clear stuff, and then we can just let it hang up here. If you're trying to take these loose by hand, you're going to find that since the viscous coupling part of it is in the rear, and if you have your axle shafts out, you'll find that this whole drive shaft wants to spin on you. So I just use the 3/8 impact, but if you don't have one of those, you'll have to figure out some creative way to keep the drive shaft from spinning, or you can just beat on your ratchet with a hammer and just kind of use that as an impact. I've actually just kind of got it hanging here on the exhaust to keep it out of the way. So what we're going to do now is just try to get everything underneath the car done, so that hopefully we don't have to come back down here again. And the next thing I'm going to do, which is probably going to be one of the most difficult parts of this job, is I'm going to be removing the power steering pump from the engine. Now, you could do this multiple ways. You could unhook the lines and pull the pump with the motor. You can choose whichever way you want to do it, but looking at the way these lines are up here, especially this big feed line, it's pretty much impossible to get it unhooked down here. What you could do is unhook that big feed line. See if I can get my hand up in there. This big one right here. You can follow that up and try to unhook it from the reservoir up there, and try to unhook this line here, or even off of the steering rack back here, which is inevitably going to make a giant mess, but it's up to you how you want to do it. So I guess just to summarize, got 2 options. One, remove the pump from the engine, leave the hoses and everything down in here when we pull the motor out, or remove this and this wherever you want to remove them from. But I'm going to be going the route of leaving the pump in the vehicle and removing it from the engine. And if you decide to do that, there's only 3 bolts that holds it on. There's 2 that's accessible from the wheel well here. So it'll be this one and this one. And as far as that belt goes, I'm just gonna cut it. It's a stretch belt. They're designed for one-time use, and this one's already getting kind of cracked a little bit. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. So it needs to be replaced anyway. And then the 3rd bolt is much more difficult to get to. So basically you can kind of see where I have my extension, a socket on that top bolt. It's behind this here, this line. It's basically directly behind it. If you look real close, let's see if I can zoom in on it and see if we can see it. So that's the socket on the bolt right now, but it gives you an idea where it's at. But I'm actually gonna end up taking it loose from the top. As you can see, I've already got the ratchet. I actually got that put on from the top. I just used a mirror to be able to see it. I'll show you that real quick. This probably doesn't even make any sense on camera, but on the right side of the mirror you can kind of see that shiny thing. Right in the center of the mirror is the pulley, and that shiny thing is my socket. Try to adjust the mirror a little bit. There you can sort of kind of see it. And you can definitely feel it back in there as well. I've got my ratchet on it, as you can see. Stick this down in there. So I'm gonna go ahead and get that loose off camera. All right, so that bolt was actually pretty dang hard to get broke loose. I'd use both hands. I had to fish both hands through here in order to get it on my ratchet. If I'd used a 3/8, it probably would have been a little easier as far as leverage, but obviously more difficult as far as room goes. So anyway, now that it's broke loose, it turns pretty easily. That's all I use, just 1/4 inch ratchet, 6-inch extension, 3-inch would probably work too, then 10mm and a swivel. All right, I haven't quite got that bolt all the way out yet, but what I'm gonna do is that little green wire that runs across the top of the motor runs back here to the power steering pump. Not really sure what it does, but I can actually see it down here, so we're gonna go ahead and unclip it. So all you do is you just push on the little release clip on it and wiggle it up, and that gets out of the way. I've heard that little green wire is very fragile, so we don't want to mess with it too much. Now I'm going to try to get that bolt the rest of the way out. I can just get my hands up in there. If you've got big old sausage fingers, this ain't going to work for you. You may have to do the other method of pulling the hoses and pulling the pump with the motor. Alright, now I'm just going to cut this belt off. Like I said, it looks like crap anyway. That actually went pretty easy with just a little tear in it. So, probably a good thing we're doing this. Now we can go ahead and get the other 2 bolts off. Real quick here, one thing I just noticed. I don't know if they're all routed this way, but you can see the wiring for the O2 sensor here actually ends up running inside of this hose. Not inside, but you know what I mean. So that's going to end up causing a problem later. When we go to pull the motor out, it's going to want to hang up in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and disconnect the O2 sensor right now and reroute that wire so that we don't have that issue. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and drain the oil out of the engine. This is a 15mm. And next we're going to take our exhaust Y pipe, well, disconnect the Y pipe. We're not actually going to take it out because it's not even the lowest part. Oil pan hangs down just as low, so we don't need to remove it for clearance. Mine are 9/16. I don't know what yours are going to be. I'll figure that out when I do this again on the other edge. But as you can see, there's some really nice welds going on here. Alternatively, for the exhaust, you can drop the whole Y pipe off of the catalytic converters, which is likely what I'm going to end up doing because those nuts are actually in fairly decent shape. I might be able to get them off. And here's the one on the back. Those are 14mm. Next, we're going to remove the torque converter bolts. And the reason we're doing that now is because it's a lot easier to do this with the engine secure than trying to do it on an engine stand or hanging off a cherry picker. So normally there is a black cover that goes right here, but just like many other things on this, it's missing. And there's just like little plastic screws that go in here that hold it in. I think a flathead takes them out. So there's 3 of these bolts. They are 18 millimeter. And what we're gonna have to do is take it out and then rotate the engine around. And how we're doing that is coming up here to the front, up onto the crank pulley with an 18 millimeter socket as well. And just put it on a breaker bar, and don't use the breaker bar for extra torque. If it starts tightening it up a little bit because the engine compression, let it bleed down and then go a little more. The only reason I'm using a breaker bar is just for ease, because sometimes they can be a little tough to turn. But if it starts getting tight, just let it go, let it set for a few seconds. You might even hear the compression bleeding down, and then turn it some more. You don't want to over torque that bolt. I'm not gonna show you, it's pretty self-explanatory with what I just said. Like I said, 3 torque converter bolts, and that's it. And just a quick little tip for you here to make this easier. Since there's 3 bolts on the converter, that means that they're mounted 120 degrees apart. And conveniently, the crankshaft pulley has 3 spokes on it. So you can actually use that as a bit of a reference on where you're at, so you don't go too far or not far enough. So like in my case here, this spoke is pretty much horizontal. So I just spin the engine clockwise until that spoke is horizontal, and so on. Now, yours might line up a little differently. You might have a vertical spoke or whatever the case may be, but either way, just figure out, get it centered up to 1 bolt, and then see where your crankshaft pulley is and just use that for reference. Here on the bracket for the torque mount, yours will probably have these. These are 10 millimeter. There's one there, and then there's one up in there that you need to take off. And I would recommend taking that off before you try to do the exhaust, because this one here is the proper way, but the position kind of makes it difficult. And on a proper vehicle, I think these are supposed to be 13 millimeter. They're extremely rusty, so I'm probably going to have a lot of fun with that. Now with that out of the way, we have easier access to the exhaust studs here. This part's going to suck. Next we're going to take the torque mount off, or just take it loose. And that's going to be a 15 millimeter. It'd be real convenient if I actually had some flex pipe back there, because then I could move this garbage out of the way. But ratcheting wrench works anyway, of course. So I got to deal with that. And then once you get your bolt out, you'll have to push it up. It's kind of got like a little bit of a self-centering feature to it. Kind of rides down into that little channel, so you'll have to go up with it. All right, so now that I hope we got everything done underneath that we need to get done, we can start getting some stuff cleared off up top here, just to give us a little bit more room. Like, we're gonna take this harness here and unclip it from the PCM and unroute it and just fling it up on the windshield or something so it's out of the way. And we got our heater hoses here we need to unhook, and probably a couple other things too. Now, as always, sometimes these heater hoses get a little bit stuck on there, so you might need to get in there with like a little pick or a screwdriver. Yep, there's some coolant. Yeah, I'm sure the cats will love that. And we can pop off our transmission linkage. Just kind of get underneath it and it should pop off of there if you're careful with it. It's just a little ball and socket. There we go. And then we'll take it loose back here. These little white tabs there, just push them in, and then you should be able to just lift this whole thing up and out of there. Just like that. Okay, then we can unhook our fuel line here, and the way this clip works, so you just pop that down and then kind of push down on this part, and then you can get behind it, gently work it out a little bit, and then push up a little bit on the bottom part too, and that'll unclip it. work that out. And it won't come all the way out. And now, I don't know if there's fuel pressure in here, so we're going to treat it like it does have fuel pressure. And we're going to take a rag and put over it, keep from squirting it in our face, and then just kind of wiggle it out. Now I'm going to cover this up with a baggie, keep it from getting contaminants in it. So I had to do a little digging through the old junk drawer of the toolbox to find them, but got some little vacuum caps, and the black one actually fits really nice over this to keep contaminants out. Then we're going to go ahead and just unclip this to get it out of the way for when we're pulling the engine out. Don't want to snap that off, and so we'll just unplug this here. This is going to have to come off anyway when we pull this harness. And then this, just pull back on that and wiggle it off. And just kind of let it hang off to the side like everything else. There we go, I like that. So now with these, what we need to do is push down on this. There we go. Real simple. And then we've got a ground here that we need to take off. And that's going to be 10 millimeter. I don't think they used a long enough stud on that. And then we'll do the same on this one here. This just, sometimes you can pull them off, sometimes you got to get in there and pry on them a little bit, but it just hooks into those little holes there. And then this comes off as well. Now we can fish this harness out of here. Oh, one more ground. Now we can fish this harness out of here, and there's going to be several different points. I guess I didn't need to take that all the way off. There's going to be several different points to where it's clipped on to different studs, and those are real easy to take off. So now if you don't have to if you don't want to, as far as pulling this harness all the way out of here. But just to avoid frustration later, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And actually, while we're here, we'll go ahead and pull this ground off as well. And this here, you can either try to open this up, which just requires a little bit of screwdriver action, or you can just pop the whole thing out of there, which that's what I'm going to do. Far simpler. And as you can see, this harness feeds pretty much everything. So we got to unhook it from the ABS sensor as well. So you might save yourself a little bit of time by not moving this whole harness out of the way, but at the same time you might add more time and frustration. So I'd rather take, even if it takes a few extra minutes, I'd rather spend a few extra minutes and have less frustration later when you're trying to pull this engine out. 10 millimeter, of course, like everything. Yeah, so that wire is running back to another ground right here, and that is 8 millimeter. And there's a little push pin holding it right there. Now we can get it out of there. And another ground, 8 millimeter. Oh, that's good on it. So for right now, we're just gonna let this hang off to the side, and then we're gonna open this up. That just pops right off. And then this part of the harness here, we're gonna try to pull out with the engine. So we'll just take this off here, another 10 millimeter. And then we'll unhook a couple wires here. And this one's pretty self-explanatory. Well, it was. Mine's broken. So we'll take this ground off. The sheer number of grounds on this is rather annoying. Oh no. Oh, I just remember I gotta put the windows back up on this thing. Well, I'm gonna work on that for a minute, because this thing is gonna have to get pushed outside, and that's not a good idea to have the windows down. So if you're stupid like me, and you forget something important like that, you're definitely going to want to, especially at this point, since we've got the fuel line unhooked, you're going to want to pull the fuel pump relay, which according to the source I just looked up, fusebox.info, it's relay number 26, which is this guy right here. So we got that pulled out, and we're going to see if this works. So all I had to do was hook that back up, and then I just hooked that ground back up. The rest of the wiring harness is completely unhooked. But a few things light up in here when you open the door. Yay. This whole thing is not happy. I don't think I've ever seen a dash with every light lit up and stay lit up. Interesting. Alright, and since this harness is coming off with the engine, don't forget to unclip it from back here. And then there's also a big vacuum line right here right behind the throttle body and everything. And the easiest place to unhook that is going to be right here. Just pull that apart. Alright, now we've got the thing back on the ground, and basically pretty much all we've got left is just the motor mounts. I'm going to pop this thing off. That's a 10 millimeter, and just make sure these rails are pretty well clear of any obstructions, and we're pretty much ready to pull it out. I got a chain ready, but let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Alright, and then on the transmission side motor mount, so there's going to be 4 bolts on this one here, and they're all going to be 13 millimeter. So there's one there, I've already got the socket on it, one there, and then there's another one. It's back in there, basically just the opposite of this one. It's going to be kind of fun to get to. Conveniently, mine is not there, so once again, the guy that worked on this before is an idiot and left stuff out, but in this case it helps me. Okay, now as far as getting that last bolt on the back side of the transmission mount, there's no real good way for me to show you how to get to it, but you can kind of see what I got going on there. I have a wrench on it. Pretty much impossible to see on the camera, but you can see it with your eyes and kind of feel for it. So I've got it broke loose now, and a ratcheting wrench is going to be your best friend on this, and you're probably going to need another wrench to go over it to give you a little bit more leverage to get it broke loose. Okay, I've got that bolt backed out to where it's all the way out, and you can tell that because as you unscrew it, you'll hear a pop when the threads kind of jump back into position because that line's in the way and holding it in. So what I'm going to do next is go ahead and run it back in just far enough that I can get the box end of my ratcheting wrench out of there, and then I'm going to use the opened end of the wrench to finish unscrewing it. I've got it now to where I can actually turn it with my fingers, but you can see it's hitting that line again. So what you can do is either get a helper or something to go up top and gently push down on this, or might be able to pull it down enough to be able to slide that bolt out of there. And just a little bit of proof that it is possible. There's the bolt. Now if you've got big old bodybuilder arms or thick sausage fingers, this is going to be significantly more difficult. For the time being, until I'm ready, I'm going to leave that one just kind of there, just in case we need to move this thing around a little bit. And then on this side, there's going to be 3 18mm bolts, one there, there, and then one on the back side over here. Right down there, you can see it. And then this one here, according to my brother-in-law, is pretty much impossible to get out. On the other edge that we're going to be working on, where this motor's going, which was his, he could not get that bolt out, and apparently, well, not apparently, he did end up destroying the little mount that it goes into, which if that happens, I'll show you here. You see this little thing right here? That's all that screws into. And really on the other one, all I'm going to do is just get a bolt and a washer, just a big washer, because I mean it's not really super structural because it's just going into sheet metal. So I don't even know why they put it there other than maybe a little bit of extra stability. Just a big washer and a new bolt is all I'm going to do for it, because his, apparently it was so stuck in there that ripped the little welds out from this thing and just ripped it right off of the sheet metal. Apparently he had a real good time with that. I got lucky with this one apparently, or I'm just a better mechanic. I'm going with I'm a better mechanic. Now everything should be loose and ready to go. So we're going to get a strap or a chain or something and wrap around each one of these motor mounts and go over, and we'll just get our cherry picker right here. So we'll grab some real heavy duty chain here to lift this out. Just kidding. I may be stupid, but I'm not that stupid. So let's make sure our chain just destroys everything around what we're working on here. That should work. Get a little bit of tension on this, just to make sure nothing goes anywhere. And kind of let this get centered up. we got it lifted up just a little bit. So I've got my riggings all set up here, and hopefully we got a pretty good center of balance. If we're off a little bit, it shouldn't slide through there. At least we hope so. You can use 2 independent chains if your hook's big enough. So we've got tension up on the engine. We're actually lifting it up off the frame here a little bit. So go ahead and take these last motor mount bolts out that were already loose. Now we get to test the tensile strength of everything that I forgot to unhook. And then we'll start sliding her forward. And in order to clear the exhaust and everything down here on this cross member, it's actually the subframe, we'll kind of pull it back a little bit and then lift up, because we don't want to damage our intake and stuff like that over here. And you could take the intake manifold off here if you really want to, but that's up to you. Pop this loose. Keep that from getting damaged. And I shouldn't have to mention this, but make sure you keep your fingies out from underneath anything, because something bad happens, you're going to lose it.
I used to laugh at safety. Now they call me Three-Finger Joe.
Man, you're just going to be a problem, aren't you? There. I might have bent it just a little bit, but that's not a big deal. Can always bend it back. Yep. She's coming. Now it's a good idea to kind of look around every now and then, see what you forgot. So there's a thing I forgot. If you take the manifold off before you do this, you won't have this problem. So this one's pretty simple, just, well, it's broken. That's cool. All right. Now that's free. All right, and we are now free, completely out of the vehicle. Now I get to roll this thing out of here and roll the other one in after I do some work to this. I'm going to be doing water pump and timing chains on this while it's out of the vehicle. Best time to do it because I can actually show you a little better now. The water pump is actually behind this engine mount, behind the timing cover, which is completely stupid. But it is what it is, and we just have to deal with it. I'll put a link to that video in the description. Maybe put a little tag thingy up there or something. So as far as putting this thing back into the vehicle or into another vehicle, as the case may be here, I'm not going to go into super great detail on that because it's pretty much just the reverse of what we've done. I'll probably highlight a few points of it on video, but instead of making you watch another probably hour long of putting it back together, if you took it apart, you should hopefully be able to put it back together. If not, you probably shouldn't have tried this. Now, if you plan on putting this bolt back in, I would highly recommend you take and just run a tap through here to clean out all the Loctite and stuff. It'll make it way easier to get back in. And let's face it, rust works quite well for Loctite. This is a M10 1.5. That's the size tap you want to run through here. And just run it back and forth a couple times. You can already kind of see all the crap that got cleaned out of the threads. So when I go to put that bolt back in, I was thinking about not even putting it back in, but figured I probably should just do it right, even though that bolt is kind of pointless. But future me will probably cuss at present me for doing that, but whatever, at least it's done right. Nothing real special about getting the motor put back in. As you can see, I left the intake manifold off just simply because it's easier to get the engine put in without it. So nothing real fancy going on here, just carefully get it put into position and, you know, get a couple bolts started where I've got it now. I've got one started over there, and yeah, just a couple things to look out for. Make sure you don't crush your AC line here. If you left the power steering pump in like I did, just be careful you're not doing any damage to that when you're bringing the engine in and setting it down. Before you put this in, before you if you had the transmission off, I would recommend you make sure that you have a bolt hole on the flex plate and on the torque converter lined up near the bottom. It just makes alignment a little easier. If you have to, once you get it in the vehicle, it's easier to do. You can pop the starter off and rotate the torque converter to line the bolts up. I would recommend getting all of your top bolts for your motor mounts at least started before you actually go set the engine all the way down. You know, get them threaded in at least a few turns. That way, you know, it just helps align everything better. And obviously once you get this thing set down, moving it is not exactly easy. Now we're going to go ahead and reinstall the upper intake manifold, and I've got to clean this up a little bit yet, but go ahead and get that cleaned up. And then we'll flip our manifold over and we'll just take that gasket out of there. It's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think I need to show you how to do that. Then you go ahead and clean that up as necessary, and then you'll take your new gasket and just push it in there. It only goes one way. So go ahead and get all those installed. Now we'll get our manifold put back on. A little bit of oil might come out. That's not a big deal at all. Don't forget to hook this here back up to your PCV valve back there. Some of this is going to depend on how you took it apart. And like this bracket here, I already took the bolt off the side of the head. Since I took the manifold off with the engine out of the vehicle, I got to go ahead and take this completely off. And just to make things easier, I'm going to go ahead and get this kind of attached. And then I'll just flop it forward so it's out of the way. Now we should be able to get this put back on here. Probably should have waited to put this wiring harness on until after this part, but it'll be fine. And just make sure that your gaskets stay in place, because if they fall out, you're going to have a massive vacuum leak when you start the engine, and it's going to run like crap, and you're going to spend a while trying to figure out what happened. I know, because I've done it. All the bolts for this are the same except for this one here. It's going to be the long guy here. Go ahead and just get them kind of threaded in. So before I torque anything down, I'm going to go ahead and get this hose hooked back up to the PCV valve, which is not exactly the easiest task to do. It's one of the reasons I'm leaving the manifold loose a little bit. So now we'll go ahead and get these bolts torqued down. Some models have a bolt here. Mine does not. Not really sure why they did that, but I'm not an engineer. Ask them. And now an additional 45 degrees. I know it's probably not exact, but certainly close enough. And then we'll get this hooked up so it's out of our way. Oh. See how many times I drop this. None would be ideal. Got it. And just snug those down. There's probably a Torx back on them, but just snug is fine. Just don't be stupid with it. Alright, so I know I said I wasn't going to cover a whole lot on the reinstallation, which obviously I'm not, because I've pretty much got everything reinstalled here. I've got it pretty much ready to run, but what we're going to do is crank it over a whole bunch until we have full oil pressure through the whole system. And the reason for that is because the tensioners are hydraulic actuated, and so, you know, I don't want this thing starting up and having the chains flopping around without proper pressure in the tensioners. So there's two ways you can go about that. I'm going to go the safer route and just pull relay 26. That's for the fuel pump. Alternatively, you can also just get in and hold your foot to the floor while you're cranking on it, but I just prefer to pull the fuel pump relay. That way there's no chance of screwing anything up. All the fluids are good. Fuel pump relay is unhooked, or removed I should say. I've got basically the bare minimum to get this thing started, which is unfortunately most of it. Exhaust is obviously still not hooked up, but yeah, that's not required. So this is going to be unbelievably loud, I imagine. So we're going to go ahead and crank on it until we get oil pressure, and then we'll put the relay back in and fire it back up. That little indicator right there, when that goes out, we'll stop cranking on it. Now we'll put the fuel pump relay back in and fire it up, hopefully. Cycle the key a few times to build up some fuel pressure. All right, that should be good. Moment of truth.